Hi then guys, and welcome to Typography in Application. I'm Ben Gribbin, and today we're going to examine typography in a practical sense. So in our last lesson we looked at the very basics of typography, the anatomy of fonts, typeface classification, the difference between fonts and typefaces. But today we're going to look at typography in application. We're going to show you all the kind of variables and settings you can change and what effects that has on the reader. So let's have a look first at weight. Let's go ahead and open up Photoshop. And we're going to create a paragraph here. We're going to use some placeholder text, which is just lorem ipsum. Drop that in, and we'll set that to regular. So that is just your bog standard default paragraph. It's got all the default Photoshop settings, and you can see it's just a paragraph. So how can we use weight or italics to add emphasis to something? Well, if we go ahead and make this line here bold, that instantly stands out from the rest of the text. But if we were to make it all bold, you can see the effect is no longer as strong because everything's bold, and if everything's bold, then actually nothing is standing out. So use it sparingly if you're going to use weight. It's a good way as well of introducing things like headings, subheadings, to break up long pieces of text. Let's go ahead and make a heading. So let's just type in this is a heading, and this is going to demonstrate something called hierarchy, because we've got quite a lot of information already on this page. So we need to start effectively separating things out, giving them their own space and kind of definition. So this is a heading, and the heading is a form of hierarchy because it's the biggest element on the page, but it's also the most important. It's the one that effectively we want to draw people's eyes to first. Then you can say that this bold line here is our second sort of most important thing, and then the paragraph. So that's hierarchy, basically using structure to format sizes and styles together to give elements priority and relative importance. Now you could also use capitals for things like this. So if we were to make this all capitals, it makes it stand out again. We can also do things like changing the italics, or making it oblique, in fact. So say this line here, we make it oblique, and you can hopefully see that now that line there is underlined, it's stressed a little bit, it's emphasized more than the rest of the document. So that's how you can use hierarchy in things like subheadings, headings, captions, and just ways of breaking up long portions of text, but in a very formulaic manner. Now we're going to look at three adjustments: tracking, leading, and kerning, and we'll see what effect they have on our text. So let's take tracking first. What is tracking? Well, basically, it's the space between each letter. So we can actually adjust tracking here in the Photoshop character panel, and you can just simply make it bigger or shorter. But if we make it 0, that's the default for that font. And if we were to make it minus, say minus 100, you can see that actually all the letters start combining together, and yeah, it looks quite cool and it's very unique, but it does make long portions of text quite difficult to read. So really you want to maybe just space them out a little bit more than standard, but you can help affect the density of a page. For example, this paragraph's quite dense. If we were to change the tracking to just 20 plus, it does add a little bit more of a spacing to it, basically, and just pads it out a little bit, makes it a little less dense and a little easier to read. So then let's have a look at kerning. Now you'll notice on our heading that some of the characters don't have the same amount of space between them, and that is because of the way fonts are made digitally. They have slightly different ways of being rendered. The computer has to do some calculation to space out elements, and different characters together make different spaces, basically. So we're going to try and kern our heading to give it more of a uniform look. So we go to the character panel, and in the character panel we are going to change the kerning, and all the kerning is the spacing between two characters. So you can see by default the spacing between this capital H and this lowercase e is quite big, and it's more different than say the one between the E and the A or the A and the D. So if we just bring our kerning back in a little bit, we can actually start to adjust each letter on its own individually and start to bring them in. And you can see already that actually that's made that letter or that word look slightly more uniform than that. That's before, that's after. And we can just literally go through the word and do that because there are several different gaps between each element here. So yes, it takes a long time, but it's well worth doing to give your pages a lot more balance. And also we can use kerning to break up things called text rivers. Now, text rivers are quite difficult to spot in currently because we don't really have many, but if we go ahead and align or justify all of our elements and then we flip it round 180 degrees, you'll see that we've got text rivers in our document. And all text rivers are white gaps that align because of the positioning of words to make these kind of annoying gaps in words. And they are quite a problem because people with dyslexia can have issues reading this sort of thing, purely because when you're reading along, your eye has to then physically move rather than just flowing from word to word. It has to jump these big gaps. So you want to try and reduce them as much as possible. And you can do that again by changing the kerning. So you could perhaps kern these letters out a little bit more to reduce this gap here or that one there. Let's try it just to show you. Let's go ahead and change the kerning slightly. And we could go through that whole word to try and space it out a little bit more. And that's what a text river is, if you ever hear anybody talking about a text river. So finally, let's look at leading. Now, it's pronounced leading because of the way typefaces used to be arranged. Typographers used to have to literally move blocks of metal around and set the spaces by moving the blocks of metal further away. And leading came from the fact that they used to use leading or lead metal between each sentence or line so that they could space them out more. So let's change the leading and see what that does. If we bring it down to, say, 20 points, so it's now got the spacing that a size 20 point font would have, even though it's 36 points. And you can see it crushes all the lines together. It's not very readable. If we set it to sort of the bare minimum we could have, it makes this whole block of text just one solid chunk, and it's quite difficult to read. You can't really jump from this line to this line very easily. So we're going to blow out the leading or leading a little bit, and we're going to do that just by adjusting it in the character panel, and we're going to put it, say, about there. Now if we compare that to how it was before, you can see it's spaced out a little bit more. It's just looks less of a block. Now it's broken up a little bit. And conversely, you can go too far with this. Just like tracking and kerning, you can actually blow your letters way, way, way out. So, for example, if we just blow them out to, say, 94 points, immediately it sort of looks like a storybook. It's very slow to read. You can't really scan it very easily, and it's just a bit clunky. So don't go too far with your leading, but do change it because that's your standard. You want to make it as easy to read as possible. So just increase the leading usually, especially on smaller fonts. If you anything below sort of 8 points or 10 points on the web or in print, you need to really focus on blowing out your leading a little bit. So we've looked at tracking, leading and kerning. Let's have a look at proximity. Now we have a paragraph here which has got a heading and we've got our header up here. Let's think about proximity. If we were to introduce a subheading here, so let's just go ahead and duplicate this, make it slightly smaller and a little bit different so it stands out as a heading rather than the same thing. Sub heading, this is. Alright, okay, so let's just slightly increase the size of it. And now you can see we've got a subheading. So proximity is the grouping of related elements together. So for example, we're going to show you now that you'd group a subheading along with a heading, like so. Rather than having it down here, it doesn't make sense to do that. And if you were to look at, say, for example, a business card design, the elements within the business card are all grouped together. So the person's name is grouped with their contact details. You wouldn't separate them out. You wouldn't separate those out. So that is proximity. Now we've just grouped our heading along with our subheading, and we've separated the paragraph out. Let's give it a little bit more spacing, and you can see now we've really differentiated and made use of proximity. Very quickly we're going to look at alignment now. Now alignment again can be used to really emphasize elements, break up long lines of text, and just give something a more clinical, clean feel. If we do what the newspapers do, if we make this block of text justified to all margins, what that means is it aligns your left hand side and your right hand side to the margin. But you will notice, for example, on this bottom sentence here, because there was only 3 words, it tries to align those and it doesn't look very good. Now you can get around that by doing a left justify, which will do the same thing, except sentences that are shorter than the full width will just be left aligned. Now that does look a lot neater. You can see we've got a nice clean margin there and there. You'll see this in books a lot. So left align, you can see it has a kind of jagged right edge, but it is left aligned. And conversely, there's right aligned, centrally justified, or right justified. So if we just go for left justified for now, let's see how we can use alignment to make something stand out. We're going to pull a quote out from within this section. So let's just delete that line, give us a nice space to work with. I'll just adjust that slightly. And then let's go ahead and type in our quote. And if we set it off again by using spacing and different sizing, we can then actually use alignment to, again, push it away, make it pop out a little bit more. So let's just set it to a slightly different size to our body text, like so. So you can see it does stand out a little bit at the minute, but it's actually taken precedence over this bold line here. So let's align it centrally. And when we do that, you can see it then appears to be more emphasized. So very simply, we can just use alignment to make things pop out and be more visible. The last thing we're going to look at is using a grid. And there is actually a built-in gridding system in Photoshop and all the other Adobe programs. So if you go ahead and turn that on, you can see down this left-hand side, none of our elements are really aligned. So let's align them to these thick black lines or thick grey lines. And that's all of those now aligned together. If I just turn that off, you'll see we've got a nice straight line. However, because we're using a grid, it does mean that we can align things as well as break alignment. And what I mean by that is breaking alignment is using your grid to your advantage, because you know where you can break the alignment and where to actually place things. Rather than just randomly popping that there, we can actually say, right, okay, we're going to align that with the serif of our H, or we're going to place that there, say there, and we're going to align it with the center of our I. And that's just going to help you make your design a little bit more uniform in terms of how the eye views it. Sometimes you might, for example, this is italicized, we might align the top left of our S with the bottom of that T just to make it look like it's on the same line, when in actual fact it's actually set over more so than where it would be, but in appearance it does look like it's been aligned. So using a grid is a good idea. You can download grids such as the 960 grid system, and they're just going to help you align your elements, give you some nice pattern and rhythm as you're going through large portions of text, and they do help with things like hierarchy and positioning. So today we have looked at all kinds of typographic adjustments. We've looked at tracking, leading, kerning, alignment, font sizing, hierarchy, and your assignment really is just to start playing around with typographic variables. What you want to do is just start experimenting ways you can use tracking and leading, different font or typefaces, and just play around with it. Have some fun with typography, because it is something that's very interesting once you get into it. Next time on Design Fundamentals, we're going to consider putting it together with visual hierarchy. Thanks for listening.